The shot rang out like thunder across the dusty main street of Weaverville, California, freezing every soul within earshot as Grace Harper stood at the altar, her white lace wedding gown catching the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the church's stained glass windows. The year was 1878, and Grace had finally convinced herself that the past was truly behind her until the heavy oak doors of the church burst open, revealing the silhouette of a man she'd tried desperately to forget. "She's mine," came the deep, gravelly voice that still haunted her dreams. Preston Garrett, her ex-husband, stood at the church door, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the aisle, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. His eyes, blue as a mountain lake, locked with hers across the stunned congregation. For 3 years, Grace had believed him dead, killed in a mining accident that had claimed the lives of 12 men in the neighboring town of Redding. 3 years of mourning, of rebuilding her life, of finally opening her heart again, this time to Walter Simmons, the town's banker whose steady presence had been a balm to her wounded soul. Walter stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Now see here, Garrett, Grace is no longer your wife. The law declared you dead, and the law was wrong," Preston interrupted, taking a step into the church. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his boots. "And I've come to claim what's mine." Grace felt her breath catch in her throat. The church had fallen into stunned silence, the reverend's prayer book still open in his hands. Her mother sat in the front pew, hand over her mouth. Her father, stern-faced and protective as always, was already rising to his feet. "Preston," Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just walk in here after 3 years and 3 years, 2 months and 14 days, he corrected her, his gaze never leaving hers. "And every one of them spent trying to get back to you." Walter moved protectively in front of Grace. "Sheriff." He called out to the back of the church where Sheriff Thomas Mitchell sat with his wife. "Arrest this man for disrupting the peace." Sheriff Mitchell stood slowly, his weathered face betraying his confusion. "Preston Garrett, we buried you. There's a marker with your name in the cemetery." "You buried an empty casket," Preston replied, his hat now in his hands, revealing hair darker than Grace remembered, longer too, with threads of silver at the temples that hadn't been there before. "And I aim to explain everything, but not here, not like this." His eyes found Grace again. "I just need 5 minutes of your time, Gracie, that's all I'm asking." The nickname Gracie sent a shiver down her spine. No one had called her that since him. She'd forbidden it. Walter was seething now. "This is preposterous. We are in the middle of our wedding ceremony." Grace's father stepped into the aisle. "My daughter has moved on, Garrett. Whatever you think you're doing here, Mr. Harper," Preston interrupted, a hint of the respect he'd once shown his father-in-law tempering his tone. "I understand your concern, but I haven't come to cause trouble. I've come for the truth." Something in his words, in the conviction behind them, made Grace step around Walter. 5 minutes, she said, ignoring Walter's protest and her mother's gasp. "You owe me that much at least." Preston nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you." Grace turned to the Reverend. "I apologize for the interruption. Reverend Davis, please, give us a moment." The whispers grew louder as Grace moved down the aisle toward the man she had once loved with every fiber of her being, the man whose death had nearly destroyed her. She held her head high, her wedding dress rustling as she walked past stunned guests, past her childhood friends who had come to celebrate her new beginning, past the life she had painstakingly built after Preston's death. When she reached him, Preston stepped back, allowing her to exit the church first. The bright California sun momentarily blinded her as she stepped onto the church steps, the distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop to the most surreal moment of her life. "You have 5 minutes," she said once they were alone outside, her voice steadier than she felt. "Start explaining why you let me believe you were dead for 3 years." Preston's expression softened. "Because until 6 months ago, I didn't remember who I was." Grace's carefully maintained composure faltered. "What? The mining accident," Preston began, his voice low. "There was a cave-in. I was trapped for days under the rubble. When they finally pulled me out, I was barely alive. A traveling doctor took me to San Francisco." I had no identification, no memory, nothing but the clothes on my back and a watch with the initials PG. Grace's hand unconsciously went to her throat, feeling for the locket that wasn't there. She'd removed it months ago, another step in letting go of her past. For nearly 2.5 years, Preston continued, I didn't know my name, where I came from, or who I was. I worked odd jobs in San Francisco trying to piece together any fragment of my past. Then 6 months ago, during a storm, I hit my head. When I woke up, it all came flooding back. You. Weaverville, our life together. He took a step closer, his familiar scent leather and pine washing over her. I came as soon as I could. I went to our house first, but strangers were living there. Then Mrs. Tillman at the general store told me. His voice broke. She told me you were getting married. Today, Grace felt tears threatening to spill. You can't just appear out of nowhere and expect. I don't expect anything, he interrupted softly. I know I've got no right, but I had to see you, had to explain. Had to make sure you knew I never willingly left you. The church door opened behind them and Walter appeared, his normally placid face contorted with anger and humiliation. Grace, the guests are waiting. This interruption has gone on long enough. Grace looked from Walter to Preston, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly turned to quicksand. Walter represented stability, security, a life without the constant worry that had plagued her marriage to Preston, who had always chased the next adventure, the next opportunity, the next mining claim that would finally make them rich. But Preston was the love she had never fully buried, the passion that Walter's gentle affection had never quite matched. I need time, she said finally, addressing both men. I can't make this decision right now. Walter stepped forward, taking her hand. There's no decision to be made, my dear. The law is clear. Your marriage to Garrett was dissolved upon his declared death. Our marriage, once completed, will be valid and binding. Preston's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. The law also recognizes that if a spouse returns after being erroneously declared dead, certain considerations must be made. Sheriff Mitchell, who had followed Walter outside, cleared his throat. He's right about that, Walter. It's complicated, but there are legal precedents. Walter's grip on Grace's hand tightened almost painfully. This is absurd. We have a church full of people waiting. Grace gently extracted her hand from Walter's. I'm sorry, Walter, but I can't proceed with the ceremony, not today, not until I understand what this means. The hurt and betrayal that flashed across Walter's face made her heart ache. He was a good man who deserved better than this public humiliation. I see, he said stiffly, his banker's composure reasserting itself. You'll forgive me if I don't wait around while you reconnect with your former husband. He turned to the sheriff. I expect the law to protect my interests in this matter, Sheriff. As Walter stalked back into the church, Grace felt a wave of guilt, followed immediately by an overwhelming sense of confusion. Preston stood silently beside her, not pressing his advantage, giving her the space she had asked for. I'm staying at the Pioneer Hotel, he said quietly. Room 204. When you're ready to talk, if you're ready to talk, that's where you'll find me. With that, he placed his hat back on his head, nodded once to the sheriff, and walked down the church steps. Grace watched him mount a chestnut stallion she didn't recognize and ride slowly down the main street of Weaverville, his straight back and proud posture exactly as she remembered. Sheriff Mitchell stepped closer. You want me to go in there and explain things to your guests, Grace? Grace shook her head, pulling her gaze away from Preston's retreating figure. No, Sheriff, this is my responsibility. Taking a deep breath, she turned and re-entered the church, where 60 of Weaverville's finest citizens sat in various states of shock and fascination. Walter stood by the altar, his best man whispering urgently in his ear. Ladies and gentlemen, Grace began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, as you've just witnessed, there has been an unexpected development. I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a joyous occasion, but I'm afraid the wedding will not be taking place today. The murmurs grew louder. Her mother began to weep softly. Walter, she continued, looking directly at the man she had been moments away from marrying, I am truly sorry. You deserve an explanation, and you'll have one, But not here, not like this. Walter's face was a mask of dignified pain. There's nothing to explain, Grace. Your choice is evident to everyone present. No, she countered firmly. I've made no choice yet. I simply need time to understand what's happened and what it means. She turned to address the congregation again. Please enjoy the wedding feast at the Harper Ranch. My parents have prepared a wonderful celebration, and there's no reason it should go to waste. With as much dignity as she could muster, Grace walked back down the aisle past the whispers and stares, past her distraught mother and stone-faced father, and out into the bright afternoon sunlight. Only when she was alone, behind the church near the small garden where she had once dreamed of taking wedding photographs with Walter, did she allow herself to collapse onto a bench and give in to the tears that had been threatening since the moment she'd heard Preston's voice. Preston Garrett was alive. Her ex-husband, was alive. The man she had mourned, had loved so deeply that his death had nearly broken her, had returned from the grave on her wedding day. And now she had to decide. The man she had once loved with reckless abandon, or the man who had painstakingly pieced her broken heart back together. As the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Weaverville, Grace knew that whatever choice she made would alter the course of her life forever. The news of Preston Garrett's return and Grace's halted wedding spread through Weaverville faster than a summer wildfire. By nightfall, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard some version of the story, each telling more dramatic than the last. Grace had retreated to her childhood bedroom at the Harper Ranch, a sprawling property just outside town that her father had built through decades of cattle ranching. She sat at her vanity, still wearing her wedding dress, staring at her reflection as if it might offer some clarity. A soft knock at the door preceded her mother's entrance. Elizabeth Harper carried a tray with a steaming cup of tea and some bread, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "You need to eat something, sweetheart," she said, setting the tray down. "You haven't had a bite all day." Grace managed a weak smile. "I'm not hungry, Mama." Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her skirts with practiced hands. "Your father is furious. Walter left town, said he's going to Sacramento to consult with a lawyer about his rights in this situation." "He has every right to be angry," Grace acknowledged, finally reaching up to remove the pins from her elaborate updo. Her chestnut hair fell in waves around her shoulders. "What would you do, Mama, if Papa suddenly reappeared after you'd believed him dead?" Elizabeth's expression softened. "That's not a fair question, Grace. Your father and I have been married for 30 years. You and Preston had barely 2 before the accident." 2 years, 3 months, and 6 days, Grace corrected automatically, then flushed at how quickly the calculation had come to her. Even after all this time, she knew exactly how long they'd been together. "The point is," Elizabeth continued, "Walter Simmons is a good, stable man who can provide for you. Preston was always restless, always chasing the next big strike, dragging you from one mining camp to another." "He had dreams," Grace defended him, surprising herself with her quick response. "Dreams don't put food on the table or a roof over your head," Elizabeth countered gently. "Dreams don't keep you warm at night when your husband's off prospecting in the mountains for months at a time." Grace turned to face her mother. "Is that what you and Papa discussed when I told you I wanted to marry Preston, that he couldn't provide for me?" Elizabeth sighed. "We worried, yes, your father especially, but we respected your choice. Just as we respected your choice to move on with Walter after a suitable period of mourning." She paused, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Grace's face. "And we'll respect whatever choice you make now, though I pray you'll think carefully about what kind of future each man offers." Grace caught her mother's hand. "What if I still love Preston? Do you love the Preston who left 3 years ago, or the man who walked into that church today? People change, Grace. You've changed. The question isn't whether you loved him then, but whether you can love who he is now, and whether that love is worth sacrificing the security Walter offers." After her mother left, Grace changed out of her wedding dress, carefully hanging it in the wardrobe where it would likely remain forever unworn. She donned a simple blue day dress, and decided to do the one thing that always cleared her mind: ride. The Harper stables were among the finest in the county, housing over 24 horses of exceptional quality. Grace's mare, Willow, nickered softly as she approached, clearly pleased to see her favorite human despite the late hour. "Hello, beautiful girl," Grace whispered, stroking the horse's soft muzzle. "We need to clear our heads, don't we?" Minutes later, they were galloping across the moonlit pastures of the ranch, the cool night air whipping through Grace's unbound hair. She rode without conscious direction, letting Willow choose their path until she found herself on a familiar ridge overlooking Weaverville. The town below was mostly dark, with just a few windows still illuminated at the saloon and the hotel. The Pioneer Hotel, where Preston was staying, room 204. Grace dismounted, letting Willow graze nearby as she sat on a large boulder, hugging her knees to her chest. From this vantage point, she could see the church where her wedding had been interrupted, the general store where she and Preston had first met when she was just 18, and the small cabin at the edge of town where they had spent the first year of their marriage before he'd struck a modest vein of gold and built her a proper house. That house now belonged to the Cooper family, who had bought it from Grace 6 months after Preston's death. She couldn't bear to live there alone, surrounded by memories of the future they'd planned together, a future that now seemed to be reaching back through time to reclaim her. "Penny for your thoughts." Grace startled at the voice, turning to find Preston standing a few yards away, his own horse grazing beside Willow. He'd changed from his earlier attire into simpler clothes, a flannel shirt, worn jeans, and his old leather vest that she'd mended countless times. "How did you find me?" she asked, making no move to rise from her perch. Preston smiled slightly. "You always came up here to think. Some things don't change." He was right. This had been their spot, where they'd come to watch the sunset, to plan their future, to resolve arguments that occasionally flared between two stubborn souls. "May I?" Preston gestured to the space beside her on the boulder. Grace nodded, shifting slightly to make room. When he sat, careful to maintain a respectful distance between them, she caught the scent that was uniquely his, bringing back a flood of memories she'd thought safely locked away. For a long moment they sat in silence, looking down at the town that had witnessed both their beginning and what she'd thought was their end. "I never planned to interrupt your wedding," Preston said finally. "I came to town yesterday intending to find you privately to explain. But then I saw the church being decorated, heard people talking about the Harper Simmons wedding, realized it was happening today." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Grace's heart ache. "I panicked. The thought of losing you again, without even having the chance to tell you the truth, I couldn't bear it. You could have approached me before the ceremony," Grace pointed out, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I tried. I went to your parents' ranch this morning, but your father's foreman told me the family had already left for town. By the time I got to the church, the ceremony had started." He turned to look at her directly. "I'm sorry for the public spectacle. That wasn't fair to you or to Simmons." Grace studied his face in the moonlight. There were new lines around his eyes and mouth, a thin scar along his jawline that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those intense blue eyes that had captivated her from the moment they'd met, were exactly as she remembered. "Tell me everything," she said quietly. "From the beginning." Preston nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The cave-in happened just like everyone heard. I was inspecting a new tunnel with 11 other men when the supports gave way. Most of the men died instantly. I was near the entrance, which is probably why I survived, but a beam caught me on the head." He touched the back of his skull unconsciously. "When I came to, I was in a wagon headed to San Francisco with a doctor named Samuel Miller. He'd been passing through Redding when they brought survivors out, said my injuries were too severe for the local doctor to handle." "Why didn't he know who you were? You must have had identification," Grace pressed. "Whatever I had was lost in the collapse." "My clothes were torn to shreds, covered in blood and dirt. The watch in my pocket with my initials was the only thing that survived, and that wasn't enough to identify me." By the time I regained consciousness, we were already halfway to San Francisco, and I couldn't remember my own name, let alone where I came from. Grace tried to imagine the fear and confusion he must have felt. And the doctor, he just took you with him. He was a good man. Took me to his clinic in San Francisco, treated my injuries, gave me a place to stay until I recovered physically. The memories, though, Preston shook his head. It was like living in a fog. I'd get flashes of a woman's laugh, the smell of pine trees, the feeling of gold dust running through my fingers, but nothing concrete, nothing I could build an identity around. So what did you do? Took odd jobs, worked at the docks for a while, then as a ranch hand outside the city. Doctor. Miller checked in on me regularly, tried different treatments to help my memory return. Preston smiled ruefully. He even tried hypnosis, but that just gave me headaches. And then 6 months ago, your memory returned, Grace prompted when he fell silent. There was a storm. I was working at a livery stable, trying to calm the horses when one of them spooked and kicked me, knocked me clear across the stall and into a wall. He chuckled without humor. Woke up the next morning with the mother of all headaches and your name on my lips. His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. It wasn't all at once, more like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Your face, our wedding day, the house I built for you, the fight we had before I left for that last mining job. Grace swallowed hard, remembering that fight. She'd begged him to stay, to be content with the modest success they'd already achieved. He'd insisted this claim would be the one to set them up for life. Why did it take 6 months for you to come back once you remembered? She asked, the question that had been nagging at her since his explanation outside the church. Preston's expression turned pained. I wasn't well, Gracie. The memories came back, but they brought nightmares with them. Terrible dreams about being buried alive, about never finding my way back to you. Dr. Miller was worried about my mental state. He thought if I rushed back without fully healing, I might. He hesitated. Might what? Might relapse, lose myself again. Preston looked down at his hands. And I had to be sure, for your sake. I had to be the man you remembered, not some broken shell. Grace felt tears threatening again. The thought of Preston struggling alone, fighting to reclaim his identity, his life, it was almost too painful to contemplate. How did you survive financially all this time? She asked, partly to give herself a moment to regain composure. The odd jobs kept me fed, and when my memory returned, I still had my skills. I went back to prospecting in the Sierras for a few months, got lucky with a small strike. Enough to buy proper clothes, a good horse, and make my way back here. He smiled slightly. I was saving the rest to start over with you if you'd have me. Grace looked back toward the town. And now, what happens now, that depends on you, Preston said softly. I have no right to disrupt the life you've built. If you tell me to go, I'll go. Just like that. After everything you went through to get back here, not just like that. It would break me, Gracie, but I love you enough to want your happiness, even if it's not with me. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. I love you. Not I loved you, but I love you present tense, immediate, undiminished by time or separation. I mourned you, Grace whispered, finally giving voice to the pain she'd carried. I wore black for a year. I cried myself to sleep every night for months. I visited your empty grave every Sunday without fail, even in the worst weather. Preston's face creased with sorrow. I'm so sorry. And then, slowly, I started to live again. Walter was patient, kind, he never pushed, just waited until I was ready. She looked at Preston directly. He helped me when I thought I couldn't go on. I owe him so much. You owe him your loyalty, if that's where your heart truly lies, Preston said, his voice rough with emotion but sincere. All I ask is that you search your heart and be honest about what you find there. Grace stood suddenly, needing to move, to put some distance between them before she did something impulsive like fall into his arms and pretend the last 3 years had never happened. I need time, she said, walking to where Willow grazed. This isn't a decision I can make tonight. Preston nodded, rising as well but keeping his distance. I understand. I'll be in town for as long as it takes. He hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know. Before I left San Francisco, I consulted a lawyer about our situation. Legally, our marriage is still valid. The declaration of death can be overturned since I'm clearly alive. But that doesn't mean you're obligated to me. There are provisions for annulment in cases like ours." Grace's hand stilled on Willow's mane. "You've researched how I could leave you. I've researched how to give you a choice," he corrected gently. "I won't hold you to vows you made to a man you thought was dead." The gesture, his willingness to release her from their marriage if that was what she wanted, touched her deeply. It was so characteristic of the Preston she had loved, putting her needs before his own desires. "Thank you for telling me," she said, mounting Willow with practiced ease. "Good night, Preston. Good night, Gracie." As she rode back toward the ranch, she could feel his eyes following her and wondered if her heart had ever truly stopped following him. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a beautiful spring day that seemed to mock the turmoil in Grace's heart. She dressed carefully in a practical riding skirt and jacket, determined to face the day with as much dignity as possible. Downstairs, she found her father in his study, reviewing ranch ledgers as he did every morning. George Harper was a large man with a stern demeanor that belied a gentle heart, at least where his only daughter was concerned. "Papa," she greeted him, leaning down to kiss his weathered cheek. "Grace." He set aside his pen. "I assume you've made a decision about this situation." "Not yet," she admitted, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I spoke with Preston last night. He explained everything, where he's been, what happened to him." George's expression hardened. "And you believe him, this convenient tale of amnesia and miraculous recovery?" "I do," Grace said without hesitation. "Preston has many flaws, but dishonesty was never among them." Her father leaned back, studying her. "Walter returned from Sacramento early this morning. He's at the bank now, but he asked to call on you this afternoon." Grace nodded, having expected as much. "I'll see him, of course. He's a good man, Grace, solid, dependable." "I know that, Papa. Garrett was always wild, restless, never content with what he had." George's voice grew softer. "I watched what his death did to you, daughter. I'm not sure I could bear to see you go through that again when he inevitably chases the next big strike." Grace understood her father's concern. He had never approved of Preston, viewing him as beneath his daughter's station. George Harper had built his ranch from nothing, and he'd always hoped Grace would marry someone who appreciated stability and tradition, someone like Walter. "People change, Papa. I've changed. Perhaps Preston has too," George snorted. "Men like that don't change, Grace. They just get better at making promises they can't keep." Grace rose, knowing further discussion would only entrench her father's position. "I should go. I told Dr. Wilson I'd help at the clinic this morning." Her father nodded, returning to his ledgers, his way of signaling the conversation was over. At the door, he called after her, "Whatever you decide, you'll always have a home here. Remember that." The walk into town gave Grace time to compose herself for what she knew would be a day of curious stares and whispered conversations. Weaverville was too small for anonymity, especially after yesterday's spectacle. The clinic was quiet when she arrived, with only old Mr. Peterson waiting to have his rheumatism treated. Dr. Wilson, a kind man in his 60s who had delivered most of Weaverville's children over the past 3 decades, greeted her with a sympathetic smile. "Ah, Grace. Wasn't sure you'd come today, given the circumstances." "I needed the distraction," she admitted, hanging her bonnet and jacket on the coat rack. "Besides, I promised to help organize your supplies, and a promise is a promise." The morning passed quickly as Grace cataloged medicines, sterilized instruments, and assisted with the few patients who came in. The work was methodical, requiring just enough concentration to keep her thoughts from constantly returning to Preston and Walter. Around noon, the clinic door opened and Sheriff Mitchell entered, his expression grave. "Sheriff," Dr. Wilson greeted him. "No emergencies, I hope?" "No, Doc, just need a quick word with Miss Grace, if that's all right." Grace felt a flutter of alarm. "Is everything all right, Sheriff?" "Best we speak privately," the sheriff suggested, glancing at Dr. Wilson, who nodded and retreated to the back room. Once they were alone, Sheriff Mitchell removed his hat. "There was a disturbance at the bank this morning, between Garrett and Simmons." Grace's heart sank. "What happened?" No one got hurt, the sheriff assured her quickly. Walter was upset, understandably so. Preston went to the bank to withdraw some funds from his old account, which apparently still exists, and they crossed paths. Words were exchanged. What kind of words? Grace pressed. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Walter may have suggested that Preston's return was conveniently timed to interfere with the wedding. Preston took exception to the implication. He cleared his throat. There might have been some shoving. My deputy broke it up before it got serious. Grace closed her eyes briefly. Are they both still in town? Walter's at the bank. Preston returned to the hotel, though he mentioned heading to his old mining claim this afternoon to see what's left of it. The sheriff hesitated. Grace, I know this isn't my business, but this situation isn't going to resolve itself. The longer it drags on, the more tension is going to build. I know, Grace acknowledged. I just need a little more time to think clearly. Sheriff Mitchell nodded, replacing his hat. Just don't take too long. Men have a way of making decisions for themselves when they get impatient. After he left, Grace found it difficult to concentrate on her work. The thought of Preston and Walter coming to blows disturbed her deeply. Neither man was normally prone to violence, which spoke to how high emotions were running. At 1 o'clock, Dr. Wilson insisted she take the rest of the day off. You're doing more harm than good with your mind elsewhere, he said kindly. Go sort out your affairs, my dear. Instead of heading directly home, Grace found herself walking toward the bank. The imposing brick building stood at the corner of Main Street and Pine, its polished brass fittings gleaming in the midday sun. Inside, the cool marble interior and hushed atmosphere conveyed the solidity and trustworthiness that Walter Simmons embodied. The teller directed her to Walter's office at the back. She knocked softly on the door, hearing his invitation to enter before stepping inside. Walter looked up from his desk, surprise registering briefly before his professional mask slipped back into place. Grace, I wasn't expecting you until later. Sheriff Mitchell told me what happened this morning, she said, getting straight to the point as she took a seat opposite his desk. Are you all right? Walter straightened some papers, a nervous habit she'd noticed early in their courtship. My dignity suffered more than anything physical. Mr. Garrett seems to have quite a temper when provoked. As do you, apparently, Grace responded mildly. The sheriff mentioned there was shoving on both sides. A flush crept up Walter's neck. He made certain insinuations about my intentions toward you that I couldn't allow to stand unchallenged. Grace sighed. Walter, I'm sorry about yesterday. You deserved better than a public humiliation. Yes, he agreed, some of his banker's composure slipping. I did. 3 years, Grace. We courted for 2 years. You had been declared a widow for almost a year before I even approached you with my interest. I followed every social protocol, respected your grief, waited patiently for you to be ready. His voice grew tighter. And then, on what should have been the happiest day of our lives, he walks in and with a few words destroys everything we built. The pain in his voice made Grace's chest constrict. It's not that simple, Walter, isn't it? He stood, pacing behind his desk. You left me at the altar, Grace, in front of the entire town. Do you have any idea what that felt like? No, she admitted quietly. And I'll regret causing you that pain for the rest of my life. But surely you can understand why I couldn't proceed with our wedding after learning Preston was alive. Walter stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of his chair. What I understand is that you're still in love with him. The blunt assessment hung in the air between them. Grace couldn't bring herself to deny it, not when she was still trying to understand her own feelings. I don't know what I feel anymore, she said honestly. Preston was my husband. We built a life together. His death nearly destroyed me, and now he's back, telling me he never willingly abandoned me. She looked up at Walter, willing him to understand. How can I possibly sort through these feelings in a single day? Walter's expression softened slightly. I'm not completely heartless, Grace. I understand the shock of his return. What I don't understand is why you need time to make a choice that should be clear. Clear to whom, Walter? To you, to my parents. This is my life, my heart at stake. And what of my heart? He countered quietly. I love you, Grace. I have built my future around the idea of you as my wife, the mother of my children. Am I simply supposed to stand aside while you decide if your ex-husband is a better option? Grace flinched at his bitter tone. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Walter moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. His touch was familiar, comforting. Grace, I know you're confused, but consider the facts. Preston Garrett abandoned you once. He didn't abandon me, Grace interrupted. He had an accident. He lost his memory. So he claims, Walter said, a note of skepticism entering his voice. Even if that's true, what happens when the next mining claim calls to him? When the next adventure pulls him away? I'm here, Grace. I've always been here, steady and constant. I can give you the stable life you deserve. His words echoed her parents' sentiments so closely that Grace wondered if they'd discussed their strategy. A stable life isn't always what makes a heart full, Walter. Walter's expression hardened slightly. No, but it keeps a roof over your head and food on your table. Passion fades, Grace. Trust and reliability endure. Grace gently withdrew her hands from his. I need to speak with Preston to understand fully what happened and what it means for my future, for our future. Walter stood, a resigned look crossing his face. I see, well, I won't keep you. He returned to his chair, once again the composed banker. I should inform you, however, that I've consulted with a lawyer in Sacramento. Your marriage to Garrett, while potentially still legally valid, can be contested given the circumstances. The courts would likely grant an annulment if you wish to pursue it. Preston already told me as much, Grace said, rising from her chair. He also said he would respect whatever decision I made. Something like surprise flashed across Walter's face. He's willing to let you go. He's willing to put my happiness above his own desires, Grace corrected gently. It's something to consider, isn't it? She left Walter staring after her, his expression unreadable. Outside the bank, Grace paused to collect her thoughts. The sheriff had mentioned that Preston planned to visit his old mining claim that afternoon. The claim was about 2 miles outside of town, in the foothills that eventually rose to meet the Trinity Alps. Without consciously deciding, Grace found herself walking toward the livery stable to rent a horse. An hour later, she approached the small cabin Preston had built at the base of his claim. It was weathered but still standing, though the door hung crookedly on its hinges, and several window panes were broken. Near the entrance to the mine shaft, she spotted Preston's horse tethered to a post. Grace dismounted, securing her own horse beside his, and approached the mine entrance cautiously. Preston, she called. There was no response. Concern flickered through her. Had there been another collapse? Was history repeating itself? She was about to call again when Preston emerged from the shaft, his face and clothes streaked with dirt, a lantern in one hand and a pickaxe in the other. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise evident in his expression. Gracie, what are you doing here? Sheriff Mitchell mentioned you were coming out to inspect your claim, she explained. I thought we should continue our conversation from last night. Preston set down his tools, wiping his hands on a bandana. I wasn't expecting company, let me just... He gestured vaguely at his disheveled state. It's nothing I haven't seen before, Grace said with a small smile. You never could stay clean when you were working the mine. A matching smile tugged at Preston's lips. True enough, come inside. The cabin's a bit worse for wear, but there should still be places to sit. The cabin's interior was dusty and showed signs of animal occupation during the years of abandonment, but the basic structure remained sound. Preston quickly cleared debris from 2 chairs near the small stone fireplace. No one's claimed the mine? Grace asked, settling into one of the chairs. Preston shook his head. Apparently not. The collapse scared people off, I suppose, and without me around to work it, the claim would have lapsed after a year anyway. He sat across from her, but it's still viable. There's a good vein running deeper than I originally thought. Grace tensed slightly. So you're planning to work it again? Preston studied her face. That depends on a lot of things, Gracie. On whether I choose you over Walter, you mean, she said directly. Partly, he acknowledged. But also on what you want. What would make you happy? Grace looked around the cabin where she'd spent countless evenings waiting for Preston to return from the mine, sometimes worried, sometimes angry at his long hours, but always in love with him despite it all. I spoke with Walter this morning, she said finally. He's hurt, angry, confused. She met Preston's gaze. As am I. I understand, Preston said softly. I've disrupted your life in the worst possible way. Not the worst, Grace corrected him. The worst was believing you were dead. This is complicated, but it's not the worst. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of birds outside. Grace studied Preston's face, the face she had memorized in happier times, had seen in her dreams during the dark days after his death, had finally forced herself to stop looking for in crowds as she built her new life with Walter. Tell me honestly, she said at last. If I choose you, what kind of life are you offering? More mining, more chasing dreams, more weeks alone while you work claims that might never pay off. Preston didn't answer immediately, seemingly weighing his words carefully. When I lost my memory, he began slowly, I lost everything that made me who I was. My name, my past, my dreams, and you. For almost 3 years I drifted, feeling like half a person. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But even without knowing who I was, I worked. I saved money. I built a reputation as someone reliable and hardworking. I learned that there's value in stability, in consistency. You've changed, Grace observed. In some ways, Preston agreed, but not in how I feel about you. That's the one thing that came back stronger than ever. He reached for her hand, hesitating just before touching her. If you choose me, Gracie, I'm offering a partnership, not just the dream of striking it rich someday, but a real partnership where we build something together day by day. And the mining, she pressed. Would you give that up? Preston's expression turned thoughtful. I don't know if I could give it up entirely, it's in my blood, but it wouldn't be like before. I've learned there are other ways to make a living, more reliable ways. Maybe I work the claim part-time while running a business in town. Maybe we use what gold I've already found to buy land, raise cattle like your father. Grace was struck by how different this conversation was from the ones they'd had during their marriage. Back then, Preston had been all fire and ambition, convinced the next big strike was just around the corner. Now there was a steadiness to him that reminded her, ironically, of Walter. And if I choose Walter, she asked, needing to understand all her options before making a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Pain flashed across Preston's features, but he answered honestly. Then I'll leave Weaverville, head north maybe to Oregon or Washington territory, start fresh somewhere my presence won't cause you pain. He swallowed hard. But I'll always hope you're happy, Gracie, that's all I've ever wanted for you. Grace felt tears threatening again. I was happy with you, Preston, until the accident. We had our struggles, our arguments, but I never once regretted marrying you. And now, Preston asked softly, do you regret it now, knowing how it all turned out? No, Grace whispered, the truth of it resonating through her. I could never regret loving you. Their eyes held, the connection between them palpable in the dusty cabin. Grace felt herself leaning forward almost unconsciously, drawn to him as she had always been. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Many horses from the sound of it. Preston stood quickly, moving to the window. There are at least 5 riders coming this way. Grace joined him at the window, peering out at the trail. That's Walter, she said, recognizing the lead rider. And my father, she frowned. And the sheriff, what in the world? Preston's expression darkened. Looks like Simmons has come to stake his claim more forcefully this time. The riders drew closer, dust billowing around them as they approached the cabin. Walter was indeed in the lead, with George Harper and Sheriff Mitchell flanking him. Behind them rode Walter's younger brother Edward and the sheriff's deputy. Stay inside, Preston told Grace, moving toward the door. Absolutely not, Grace countered, following right behind him. This concerns me more than anyone. Together, they stepped onto the cabin's small porch as the riders drew to a halt in the clearing. Walter's face was a mask of controlled anger, while her father looked grimly determined. Sheriff Mitchell, to his credit, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Walter, Grace acknowledged, her voice steady. Papa, Sheriff, this is quite a welcoming committee. We've come to escort you home, Grace, George Harper announced, dismounting. This has gone on long enough. Walter remained on his horse, looking down at Preston with barely concealed contempt. I trusted you to respect Grace's need for time and space, Garrett. Instead, you lured her out to this, hovel to press your advantage. Preston's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. Grace came here of her own accord. I've lured no one. Is that true, Grace? Her father demanded, stepping closer to the porch. Did you come here willingly? Of course I did, Grace replied, indignation rising. I'm a grown woman, Papa. I make my own decisions about where I go and whom I speak with. Sheriff Mitchell dismounted, approaching with a more conciliatory air. No one's suggesting otherwise, Grace, but there's been considerable upset in town. Your mother is beside herself with worry. Walter here was concerned for your safety when he heard you'd followed Garrett to the mine. My safety, Grace repeated incredulously. Preston would never harm me. People change, Walter said, finally dismounting and approaching the porch. 3 years is a long time. The man you knew may not be the man standing beside you now. Preston's jaw clenched. That's rich coming from a man who's ridden out here with a posse to intimidate his romantic rival. Walter flushed. This is not intimidation. This is concern for a woman I love and had planned to marry until you conveniently reappeared. There was nothing convenient about it, Preston shot back, taking a step forward. You think I wanted to lose 3 years of my life? To miss saying goodbye to my own father before he passed, to cause Grace the pain of believing I was dead. The revelation about Preston's father caught Grace by surprise. Frank Garrett had died just over a year ago, a quiet passing in his sleep after a long illness. Preston had been close to his father. The news of his death must have been another cruel blow upon regaining his memory. Gentlemen, Sheriff Mitchell intervened, stepping between the two men. Let's all calm down. No one needs to do or say anything they'll regret later. Grace moved forward, placing herself beside Preston. I appreciate your concern, all of you, but this situation is between Preston, Walter, and me. We don't need an audience for it. Grace, her father began, his tone softening slightly, your mother and I only want what's best for you. After everything you went through when Preston was presumed dead. I know, Papa, but I'm not a child to be protected from difficult decisions. I'm a woman who needs to follow her heart. Walter's expression changed, something like resignation flickering across his features. Your heart, he repeated softly. It's never truly been mine, has it? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that would change all their lives. Grace looked from Walter solid, dependable, kind Walter who had helped her rebuild her shattered life to Preston, the man whose supposed death had caused that shattering in the first place. In that moment, with 5 pairs of eyes watching her intently, Grace Harper knew with sudden clarity where her heart truly belonged. I'm sorry, Walter, she said gently. I do care for you deeply. You helped me when I was at my lowest. You showed me I could love again. She swallowed hard. But Preston is my husband, not just legally, but in every way that matters. The connection between us never truly broke, even when I thought him dead. Walter's face went very still. Beside him, her father sighed heavily while Sheriff Mitchell looked away, giving them what privacy he could in the tense situation. I see, Walter said finally, his banker's composure firmly in place despite the hurt evident in his eyes. Well, I appreciate your honesty, if not your timing. He turned to remount his horse. Sheriff, Mr. Harper, I believe our business here is concluded. Walter, wait, Grace called, stepping off the porch. Please understand, I understand perfectly, Grace, Walter interrupted, not unkindly. You've made your choice. I respect it, even if I disagree with it. He settled into his saddle. I wish you happiness, I truly do, but I think it's best if I return to Sacramento for a while. My brother can manage the bank in my absence. Before Grace could respond, Walter turned his horse and rode away, his brother quickly following. Sheriff Mitchell nodded respectfully to Grace and Preston before mounting up as well. I'll see to it he gets back to town safely, the sheriff said. He's hurting pretty bad right now. George Harper remained, looking at his daughter with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. You're sure about this, Grace? Absolutely sure, Grace nodded, feeling Preston's solid presence behind her. I am, Papa, her father sighed again, heavier this time. Your mother won't be pleased. She had her heart set on Walter for you, I know, But it's my heart that matters in this decision, isn't it? George studied her face for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Preston. You hurt her again, Garrett, in any way, and there won't be a place on this earth you can hide from me. Understood, Preston stepped forward, standing beside Grace. Yes, sir, I understand. I love your daughter. I always have, even when I couldn't remember my own name. I'll spend every day making sure she never regrets choosing me. George nodded once sharply, then mounted his horse. Your mother will expect both of you for dinner tonight. Don't be late. She gets testy when the roast dries out. With that unexpectedly practical invitation, the closest thing to a blessing they were likely to get for the moment, George Harper rode after the others, leaving Grace and Preston alone outside the weathered cabin. For a moment neither spoke, the enormity of what had just happened settling around them like the dust from the departing horses. Did you mean it? Preston asked quietly. About choosing me, Grace turned to face him fully. I meant every word. It was always you, Preston. Even when I thought I was ready to marry Walter, there was a part of my heart I never gave him. I couldn't. It was still yours. Preston's face transformed, joy and relief breaking through like sunlight after a storm. He reached for her, hesitating just before touching her. May I? Grace closed the distance between them, stepping into his embrace as naturally as coming home after a long journey. His arms wrapped around her, strong and secure, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. The familiar scent of him, earth and pine, and something uniquely Preston enveloped her. I missed you so much, she whispered against his chest. Even when I tried to forget, I missed you. Preston's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his touch reverent. I missed you even when I didn't know who you were. There was always this emptiness I couldn't explain, this sense that someone vital was missing from my life. He drew back slightly, looking down at her with such tenderness that Grace's breath caught. I love you, Gracie. I never stopped loving you, not even when I couldn't remember your name or your face. Grace reached up, tracing the new lines around his eyes, the scar along his jaw, relearning the face of the man she loved. I love you too, through death and beyond, apparently. Preston's smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a reintroduction after years apart. Then, as if a dam had broken, it deepened, became hungry, desperate, a physical manifestation of all the longing and grief and hope that had defined their separation. Grace wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, pouring 3 years of missed moments into this one perfect reunion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I should probably clean up before dinner with your parents, he said, glancing down at his dirt-streaked clothes. Your mother never did approve of me tracking mining dust into her house. Grace laughed, the sound bright and joyous in the afternoon sunlight. Some things never change. But some things do, Preston said, his tone growing serious again. I meant what I said earlier. I'm not the same man who left you 3 years ago. I've learned what truly matters. He took her hands in his. I want to build a real life with you, Gracie, a stable one. And I want that too, Grace assured him. But don't think you have to become Walter to make me happy. I fell in love with Preston Garrett, adventurer, dreamer, man with gold dust in his veins. I just want to be your partner in those adventures, not the wife left waiting at home. Preston nodded, understanding, lighting his eyes. Partners, in everything, Grace agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the clearing, Grace and Preston stood together at the threshold of their second chance, older, wiser, scarred by separation, but stronger for having found their way back to each other against impossible odds. Later that evening, after surviving dinner with Grace's parents, Elizabeth Harper warming considerably after seeing her daughter's genuine happiness, Preston and Grace walked arm in arm along the main street of Weaverville. The town was quiet, most businesses closed for the night, only the saloon showing signs of life with light and music spilling from its doors. Where will we live? Grace asked, practical considerations beginning to surface now that the emotional whirlwind was settling. The house I built for you belongs to the Coopers now, Preston noted. And I doubt you'd want to move back into the mining cabin, Grace smiled, leaning into his side. Definitely not. I was thinking perhaps we could stay at my parents' ranch for a short while just until we decide our next steps. Your father would love that, Preston said dryly. Having me underfoot every day, he'll adjust, Grace assured him. Especially once he sees how serious you are about building a stable future. They passed the church where, just a day earlier, Grace had nearly married another man. The building stood silent and dark now, yet Preston felt a ripple of gratitude for the impulse that had driven him to interrupt the ceremony. Had he arrived a day later? What are you thinking about? Grace asked, noticing his distraction. How close I came to losing you forever, he admitted. If I'd arrived in town a day later. Grace squeezed his arm, but you didn't. You got here in time. Maybe fate was on our side for once. Preston nodded, then guided her to a bench outside the general store. There's something I want to ask you, he said as they sat down. Something important. Grace looked at him curiously. What is it? From his pocket, Preston withdrew a small velvet pouch. When I regained my memory in San Francisco, the first clear image that came to me was your face on our wedding day. The second was this. He opened the pouch, tipping its contents into his palm, a simple gold band with tiny etched stars circling it. Your wedding ring, Grace gasped softly. My ring, but how? It was lost in the cave-in. Not lost, Preston corrected. I had taken it to be resized as a surprise for our anniversary. It was in my pocket when the accident happened. Dr. Miller found it when he was treating me, kept it safe all those years along with my watch. Tears filled Grace's eyes as she looked at the ring she had thought gone forever, like the man who had placed it on her finger. I know we're already married, technically speaking, Preston continued, his voice growing husky with emotion. But so much has changed, we've changed, so I wanted to ask. He slid from the bench onto one knee before her. Grace Harper Garrett, will you marry me again? Will you renew our vows and give us the fresh start we both deserve? Grace felt joy bubbling up inside her, spilling over in laughter and tears. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you again, Preston Garrett. Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly as if it, like him, had always been destined to return to her. Rising, he pulled her to her feet and into his arms, sealing their second engagement with a kiss that promised all the tomorrows they had almost lost. 3 weeks later, Grace stood in her childhood bedroom, examining her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress was new. She couldn't bring herself to wear the one intended for her marriage to Walter, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was styled simply, adorned only with small white flowers. You look beautiful, Elizabeth Harper said from the doorway, her eyes soft with emotion. Over the past weeks, she had gradually come to accept Grace's decision, especially after seeing the evident change in Preston and his clear devotion to her daughter. Thank you, Mama, Grace replied, turning from the mirror. I'm nervous, isn't that strange? I'm already married to the man, yet my heart is racing. Elizabeth smiled, stepping into the room to adjust a stray lock of Grace's hair. It's not strange at all. This isn't just a ceremony, it's a new beginning. A knock at the door preceded George Harper's entrance. He stopped short at the sight of his daughter, his usually stoic expression softening. Well now, he said gruffly, don't you look like your mother on our wedding day? Grace crossed to her father, kissing his cheek. The highest compliment you could give me, Papa, George cleared his throat. The guests are all seated. Preston's waiting at the altar looking like he might jump out of his skin with nerves. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Can't fault his eagerness to marry you, I suppose. This time, the ceremony was being held in the garden of the Harper Ranch, under an arch of flowers with the Trinity Mountains providing a majestic backdrop. Only close friends and family had been invited, a stark contrast to the large, formal church wedding that had been interrupted 3 weeks earlier. Walter Simmons had left for Sacramento as promised, though he'd sent a brief but gracious note wishing Grace happiness. It was more than she had expected, and she was grateful for the gesture. His brother Edward remained in Weaverville to manage the bank and had politely declined the invitation to the wedding, which Grace understood completely. "It's time," George said, offering his arm to his daughter. "Ready." Grace took a deep breath, then nodded, taking her father's arm. "More ready than I've ever been." The small gathering of guests rose as Grace appeared at the garden path, but she had eyes only for Preston, who stood waiting for her beneath the flower arch. He wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, but it was the expression in his eyes that caught and held her a look of such profound love and wonder that it took her breath away. This time, there was no interruption as Reverend Davis led them through their vows. No unexpected arrival, no dramatic declaration, just two people who had found their way back to each other against all odds, promising to love and cherish one another for the rest of their days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Davis announced with a warm smile. Again. A ripple of laughter moved through the small gathering at the addition, which the Reverend had suggested as an acknowledgement of their unusual circumstances. "You may kiss your bride," he added, stepping back. Preston cupped Grace's face in his hands, his touch infinitely tender. "I love you, Gracie," he whispered, just for her ears. "In this life and whatever comes after." "I love you too," she replied, rising on her toes to meet his kiss. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. Tables had been set up on the ranch's sprawling lawn, laden with food prepared by Elizabeth Harper and the neighboring women. Music came from a small band of local players, filling the air with lively tunes that soon had guests dancing on the grass. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Preston drew Grace away from the festivities, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an ancient oak tree that overlooked the property. "I have something to show you," he said, pulling a folded document from his jacket. Grace took it curiously. "What's this? Open it and see." Unfolding the paper, Grace quickly scanned its contents, her eyes widening. "Preston, this is a deed for land just outside town." Preston nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. 10 acres with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains. I bought it last week with some of the gold from my claim." He took her hands in his. "I thought we could build a house there, design it together exactly as we want it." "Our house," Grace whispered, the prospect filling her with joy, "on our land." "And that's not all," Preston continued. "I've been talking with your father. He's agreed to help me start a small cattle operation on the property. Nothing as grand as his ranch, of course, but enough to provide a steady income." Grace's surprise must have shown on her face because Preston laughed. "Don't look so shocked. Your father and I have more in common than either of us realized. We both love the land. We both value hard work. And we both love you more than anything." "When did this partnership develop?" Grace asked, amazed at the change in the two men who had been at odds for so long. "We've had a few conversations over the past weeks," Preston admitted. "I think he's finally starting to believe I'm serious about providing a stable future for you." He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. "I'll still work the mining claim part-time. There's good color there, and it would be foolish to abandon it entirely, but it won't be like before. No more weeks away, no more putting the dream of striking it rich above our life together." Grace leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It sounds perfect." "It will be," Preston promised, pressing a kiss to her temple, "because we'll build it together." From the celebration behind them came the sound of laughter and music, of friends and family celebrating their reunion and fresh start. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, soaking in the perfection of the moment, the warmth of Preston's embrace, the promise of their future together, the blessed second chance they had been given. "We should get back," she said eventually. "They'll be wondering where we've disappeared to." Preston grinned, a flash of the roguish charm that had first captured her heart 5 years earlier. "Let them wonder. I'm not quite ready to share my wife again just yet." "Wife," Grace repeated, savoring the word. "Your wife, again and always." "Again and always," Preston echoed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the setting sun bathed them in golden light, illuminating the path to their future, a future they would walk together, hand in hand, partners in everything that lay ahead. 6 months later, Grace stood on the porch of their newly completed house, watching as Preston rode in from checking the small herd of cattle that now grazed on their land. The house was everything they had dreamed of: 2 stories with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, large windows to capture the mountain views, and a stone fireplace that formed the heart of their home. As she had promised in their renewed vows, Grace had become a true partner in all their endeavors. She kept the books for both the cattle operation and the mining claim, which Preston worked 2 days a week with hired help. The arrangement provided them with a comfortable living and, more importantly, time together. Preston dismounted, leading his horse to the small stable they had built adjacent to the house. Grace smiled as she watched him move, still struck sometimes by the miracle of his presence in her life when she had once believed him gone forever. Admiring the view, he called over his shoulder, catching her watching him. Grace laughed. Always. After settling his horse, Preston crossed to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time and gathering Grace into his arms. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" he asked, one hand dropping to rest on the gentle swell of her stomach. "We're well," Grace assured him, covering his hand with hers. "Though your son or daughter seems determined to practice their dancing skills today." Preston's face lit up with wonder as he felt the baby move beneath his palm. They had discovered Grace was expecting just a month after their second wedding, a joyous surprise that had cemented their fresh start. "Maybe they're practicing for the spring festival dance next week," Preston suggested, leading Grace to the porch swing he had built for her. "Are you still feeling up to going? I wouldn't miss it," Grace said as they settled onto the swing, Preston's arm around her shoulders. "Besides, Dr. Wilson says I have at least another month before this little one arrives." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. From this vantage point, they could see the spire of Weaverville's church in the distance, the building that had been the site of such drama in their lives now simply a part of the town they called home. "I saw Walter Simmons in town today," Preston said eventually. "He's back from Sacramento permanently now, taking over the bank again from his brother." Grace tensed slightly. "Oh, how did he seem?" "At peace, I'd say. He mentioned he's engaged to a woman he met in Sacramento, daughter of a banking associate of his." Preston glanced down at her. "He asked after you, wanted to know if you were well. And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're happy, healthy, and about to make me the proudest father in Trinity County." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "He seemed genuinely pleased for us." Grace relaxed against him, relieved. She had worried about Walter's return to Weaverville, not wanting awkwardness or lingering resentment to cloud their future in the small community. "I'm glad. He deserves happiness." "As do we all," Preston agreed. "Speaking of happiness, your mother dropped by this morning while you were visiting Mrs. Peterson. She's finished the quilt for the baby's crib." Grace smiled. Elizabeth Harper had thrown herself into grandmother preparations with characteristic thoroughness, knitting, sewing, and offering advice, sometimes more than was strictly welcome at every opportunity. "And my father, did he come with her?" "No, but he sent word that the new bull he ordered for us should arrive next week. Says it's the finest breeding stock in Northern California." Preston chuckled. "I think he's more excited about our cattle operation than his own these days." The transformation in George Harper's attitude toward Preston had been one of the most unexpected blessings of the past months. The 2 men had developed a genuine respect for each other, bonding over their shared interest in ranching and, of course, their mutual devotion to Grace. "I never thought I'd see the day when you and my father would be partners in anything," Grace mused. "Life is full of surprises," Preston replied, his hand moving in gentle circles over her rounded belly. "Some of them terrible, like being trapped in that mine. Some of them miraculous, like finding our way back to each other." Grace turned in his arms, looking up into the face she had once thought she would never see again. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't lost your memory, if you'd come home after the accident?" Preston considered the question. I used to torment myself with those thoughts, all the moments we lost, the pain you suffered believing me dead. His expression softened. But then I realized something important. Those 3 years changed us both. They taught us not to take each other for granted, not to waste a single day together. They made us appreciate what truly matters, Grace agreed, resting her head against his chest, the steady beat of his heart a constant reassurance. And they brought us to this moment, to this life we're building together, to the family we're creating. As if in response, their unborn child kicked vigorously, making them both laugh. I think someone agrees with you, Preston said, his voice filled with wonder and love. The sunset deepened, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. From their porch, Grace and Preston Garrett watched night fall over the land that was now their home, the future stretching before them like an unwritten story, a story they would write together, day by day, year by year. I love you, Grace whispered, the words a simple truth that had survived separation, grief, and confusion to emerge stronger than ever. Again and always. Preston's arms tightened around her, holding her and their unborn child in the shelter of his embrace. Again and always, Gracie. In this life and beyond. As darkness settled over Weaverville, a single lamp glowed in the window of the Garrett home, a beacon of the love and life within, a testament to second chances, to faith rewarded, to a journey that had come full circle and begun anew. For Preston and Grace, the future beckoned, bright with promise and possibility, each day a gift more precious for having almost been lost. And in the quiet of their embrace, two hearts beat as one, joined by the smaller, faster heartbeat of the new life they had created together, a life that represented not just their love, but their enduring hope in the face of impossible odds, their unbreakable bond that had transcended even death itself. Again and always,